Chapter 1. The Seville Celebration. The annual Seville Orange Festival in St. Mary Mead was, by all accounts, the social event of the winter season. Despite the chill that lingered in the February air, practically every resident had ventured out to the village hall, drawn by the promise of warmth, gossip and, most importantly, Mrs. Blackwood's award-winning marmalade. For 53 consecutive years, Agatha Blackwood had claimed the Golden Spoon trophy with her secret family recipe. Her Seville orange preserve, with its perfect balance of bitter and sweet, had become something of a legend in 3 counties. Even London grocers had attempted to court her with promises of lucrative contracts, all of which she had firmly declined with a polite smile and unwavering conviction. "My marmalade is for friends and neighbours," she would say, "not for profit." Miss Jane Marple sat quietly at her customary corner table, knitting needles clicking softly as her pale blue eyes surveyed the bustling hall. At 82, her white hair was arranged in its usual neat waves, and her slight frame was dressed in a modest lavender dress with a lace collar. To the casual observer, she appeared to be nothing more than a sweet, elderly spinster, precisely the misconception that had served her so well over the years. "Another cup, Miss Marple." Reverend Blakely paused at her table, teapot in hand. "How kind, thank you," she replied, setting down her knitting. "Such a lovely turnout this year." "Indeed, though Mrs. Blackwood seems rather agitated, doesn't she?" "Most unusual." Miss Marple followed his gaze to where the normally composed Agatha Blackwood stood near the judge's table, her normally serene face flushed with distress. Her white-knuckled hands clutched at the pearls around her neck, and she appeared to be speaking rapidly to her daughter, Caroline. "Most unusual," Miss Marple agreed mildly, "particularly on the day of her triumph." The Reverend nodded and moved on, but Miss Marple continued to observe the Blackwood women. Caroline, a handsome woman in her 40s who had returned from London 3 months ago after a failed marriage, was making obvious attempts to calm her mother. Their gestures, though controlled, spoke of significant distress. Across the room, Dr. Martin Graves watched the scene with undisguised interest. The new village doctor had arrived 6 months ago, and had quickly become popular among the younger residents of St. Mary Mead. His handsome features and London sophistication contrasted sharply with their previous physician, the elderly and rather gruff Dr. Harris Penny. "For your thoughts, Miss Marple?" Inspector Craddock slid into the chair. Opposite her, though technically off-duty, the detective's sharp eyes missed little. "Oh, nothing of importance," she demurred. "Just an old woman's idle observations." "Which, as I've learned, are anything but idle," he replied with a smile. "What do you make of the commotion by the judge's table?" Before she could answer, a sudden hush fell over the room. Mrs. Blackwood stood at the centre, her face now ashen. The village council chairman beside her cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I regret to inform you that there will be a slight delay in our judging proceedings. It seems that Mrs. Blackwood's, entry has been, well, it appears to be missing." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed immediately by a buzz of excited whispers. In St. Mary Mead, the disappearance of the legendary marmalade recipe was nothing short of scandalous. "Missing?" someone called out. "How could it be missing? She's kept it under lock and key for half a century. Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, her voice thin but dignified. "The recipe itself is safe," she clarified, "but my competition entry, 6 jars prepared specially for today, have disappeared from my pantry. The door was locked, and only my family has keys." Her gaze swept meaningfully across the room. "Someone has taken them." Caroline quickly guided her mother to a chair as the whispers intensified. The chairman attempted to regain control, announcing that the other categories would be judged as planned while they sorted out this unfortunate misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding?" scoffed Eliza Hartley, Mrs. Blackwood's longtime neighbour and rumoured rival. "More likely she's finally realised someone else's preserve might actually win this year, and couldn't bear the humiliation." Miss Marple's needles paused momentarily as she caught the barely concealed triumph in Eliza's voice. Her gaze drifted to Eliza's own entry, 6 perfectly aligned jars with handwritten labels featuring an elaborate script. "What do you think, Miss Marple?" Inspector Craddock asked quietly. "Theatrical dramatics or genuine theft?" "Oh, I wouldn't presume to say," she replied, resuming her knitting. "But I do recall my grandnephew Raymond saying something rather pertinent about his publishing world, that nothing generates interest quite like controversy." Their conversation was interrupted as young Timothy Blackwood, Agatha's 17-year-old grandson, burst through the doors, breathless and wide-eyed. "Gran," he called out, hurrying toward his grandmother. "Someone's broken into the house! The study's been ransacked!" The room erupted in exclamations of shock and concern. Mrs. Blackwood swayed slightly in her chair, while Caroline steadied her. Inspector Craddock immediately stood, duty overtaking leisure. "Please remain calm," he announced authoritatively. "I'll investigate this matter immediately." As he strode toward the Blackwood family, he caught Miss Marple's eye. She offered a small, knowing smile. Both understood that the missing marmalade was likely just the surface of something far more complicated. For in St. Mary Mead, as Miss Marple had observed countless times, the simplest mysteries often concealed the most complex human entanglements. And as she gathered her knitting into her bag and prepared to follow discreetly, she couldn't help but wonder what secrets the Blackwood family pantry and study might be preserving alongside the famous marmalade. Chapter 2. Fingerprints and Footprints. The Blackwood residence stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, a handsome Georgian house with climbing roses that would bloom magnificently in summer, but now lay dormant against the red brick walls. A small crowd had gathered at the ornate iron gates, drawn by the news that had spread through the village with remarkable speed. Miss Marple arrived just as Inspector Craddock was establishing a perimeter. She approached with measured steps, umbrella in hand, despite the clear sky, a habit born from decades of English weather's unpredictability. "I'm afraid I can't allow anyone in, Miss Marple," Craddock said apologetically when he spotted her. She nodded understandingly. "Of course, Inspector. I merely wanted to return this book I borrowed from dear Agatha." She produced a slim volume on horticulture from her bag. "But it can certainly wait until this unpleasantness is resolved." Something in her tone made Craddock hesitate. After years of working with the elderly spinster, he had learned to recognize the gleam in her eye that signaled her unique insight. "Perhaps you might come in briefly," he conceded. "Mrs. Blackwood seems quite distressed, and a friendly face might help." Inside, the house was immaculate save for the study. Agatha Blackwood sat rigidly in an armchair, Caroline hovering protectively nearby. Timothy paced by the window, his lanky frame casting long shadows across the Persian rug. "Jane," Agatha acknowledged with visible relief. "How good of you to come." Miss Marple approached her old friend and clasped her trembling hands. "My dear, what a dreadful business." "It's the recipe box they were after," Agatha explained, her voice steadier now. "Great-grandmother's rosewood box with the brass inlay. 50 years of recipes, not just the marmalade." Caroline interjected, "Mother keeps saying that's what they wanted. But why would anyone break in for recipes when there's silver in the dining room and Father's collection of snuff boxes upstairs?" "Because recipes can be worth more than silver, dear," Miss Marple said softly. "Particularly ones with history." Something unspoken passed between the two older women, and Agatha's face tightened. Inspector Craddock returned from the study. The window was forced open, but curiously, there's very little damage. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. "Has anything else been taken?" Miss Marple inquired innocently. Timothy stopped pacing. Gran's competition jars are gone, obviously, and someone went through Father's desk. Harold's desk? Agatha looked startled. "But why would anyone—" "I'm not sure they found what they were looking for," Timothy continued. "The papers are disturbed, but nothing seems to be missing." Miss Marple's needles would have clicked thoughtfully had she been knitting. Instead, her fingers smoothed the edges of her handbag as she observed Caroline's face. The younger woman's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly at the mention of her late father's desk. "When did you last see the recipe box, Mrs. Blackwood?" Craddock asked. "Yesterday evening. I was preparing my entry statement for the judges. Tradition, you know." Dr. Graves appeared in the doorway, medical bag in hand. "I came as soon as I heard," he announced. "Mrs. Blackwood, you really shouldn't be under such strain." "I'm perfectly fine, Doctor," Agatha replied stiffly. "This is a family matter." "A criminal matter now," Craddock corrected. "Dr. Graves, unless you've been called professionally, I must ask you to leave." "Caroline called me," the doctor replied smoothly. "Concerned about her mother's heart condition." Miss Marple noted how Caroline avoided her mother's questioning gaze. "I have no heart condition," Agatha stated firmly. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by the arrival of Eliza Hartley at the door, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Agatha, darling," she exclaimed, "the whole village is talking about this dreadful business. I simply had to come and offer my support." "How did you get past my officer?" Craddock asked sharply. "Oh, he knows me well enough." Eliza waved dismissively. "Agatha and I have been neighbours for 30 years. "Competitors for 30 years, you mean?" Timothy muttered, earning a reproving glance from his mother. Eliza approached Agatha, grasping her hands. "And I've withdrawn my entry from the competition, of course. It wouldn't be right to proceed without you." "That's hardly necessary," Agatha replied. "The festival shouldn't suffer because of this incident." Miss Marple watched as Eliza's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on Agatha's hands. "I insist," she said. "After all, we both know there are more important things than winning." There was something in her tone that caused Miss Marple to tilt her head slightly, a gesture that Inspector Craddock had come to recognize as significant. "Miss Hartley," he intervened. "Did you happen to notice anything unusual around the property last night or this morning?" Eliza released Agatha's hands. "Not a thing, Inspector, though I did see Timothy returning rather late. Past midnight, I believe." All eyes turned to the young man, who flushed deeply. "I was at the Bell and Crown with friends," he said defensively. "Ask the publican if you don't believe me." "No one is accusing you of anything," Caroline said sharply, but her worried glance toward her son suggested otherwise. Miss Marple rose carefully. "I should be going. Agatha, do let me know if there's anything I can do." She moved toward the door, then paused as if something had just occurred to her. "Oh, by the way, is your garden shed still unlocked? Only I noticed last week when I borrowed your secateurs that the latch was sticking." "The garden shed?" Agatha frowned. "I haven't been out there since autumn." "I fixed it last week," Timothy offered. "Had to replace the whole mechanism." "How industrious!" Miss Marple smiled. "Well, I'll be on my way." As Inspector Craddock showed her out, she murmured, "You might want to look at the garden shed, Inspector, and perhaps ask who else has recently taken an interest in it." Craddock glanced at her sharply. "Do you know something, Miss Marple?" "Not at all," she replied, her expression innocent. "Merely an old woman's curiosity about latches and locks. My nephew Raymond always says the smallest details often explain the largest mysteries." As she walked away, Miss Marple knew that while the missing marmalade might seem trivial to some, in St. Mary Mead such domestic disputes often revealed much deeper, darker currents flowing beneath the village's tranquil surface. Chapter 3. Tea Leaves and Whispers. The following morning dawned with a crisp clarity that belied the murmurs of suspicion now rippling through St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple sat at her breakfast table, the morning light streaming through lace curtains, as she methodically spread a thin layer of butter on her toast. The absence of marmalade was conspicuous. "Shall I fetch the blackberry preserve instead, miss?" asked her housekeeper Florence. "Thank you, Florence, and perhaps you might tell me what they're saying in the village this morning." Florence set down the preserve pot with evident relish. "Well, miss, they're saying young Timothy Blackwood wasn't at the Bell and Crown after 11, though he claims he stayed till closing, and Mrs. Hartley has been telling anyone who'll listen that she saw lights in the Blackwood garden shed at midnight. "Indeed?" Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly as she sipped her tea. "Most interesting." The telephone's shrill ring interrupted their conversation. Florence answered it, then turned to Miss Marple with a grave expression. "It's Inspector Craddock, miss. He wonders if you might join him at the Blackwood house. There's been another development." 20 minutes later, Miss Marple was making her way up the gravel path toward the Blackwood residence. The garden shed stood open, and beside it, Inspector Craddock was deep in conversation with Sergeant Davis. "Ah, Miss Marple," Craddock called, when he spotted her. "Thank you for coming." "Not at all, Inspector. I take it you found something of interest in the shed." Craddock led her toward the small wooden structure. The missing marmalade jars were here, hidden under a tarpaulin. He hesitated, then added, "along with this." He produced a sealed evidence bag containing a tattered piece of paper. Through the plastic, Miss Marple could make out a recipe written in faded ink The famous recipe? She inquired. A copy of it, Mrs. Blackwood believes. The original is still missing. Miss Marple squinted at the paper. Those look like additions in the margin, in a different hand. Yes, Craddock confirmed. And there's something else. He gestured toward the garden. We found disturbed earth near the old apple tree. Someone has been digging recently. Miss Marple followed his gaze to where a constable was carefully examining the soil around a gnarled apple tree. How curious, she murmured. That tree must be as old as the house itself. There's more, Craddock said quietly. Dr. Graves called this morning. He's concerned about Mrs. Blackwood's reaction to finding the jars. Apparently, she became quite hysterical and had to be sedated. Sedated? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes sharpened. That seems rather extreme for someone with no heart condition. Before Craddock could respond, Caroline appeared at the garden door, her face drawn with worry. Inspector? Mother's awake and asking for you. They found Agatha Blackwood in the morning room, propped up with pillows on a chaise longue. Despite the sedation, her eyes were alert and focused. Jane, she acknowledged Miss Marple with a weak smile. I'm glad you're here. I need a clear head, and yours is the clearest I know. Mrs. Blackwood, Craddock began formally. About the jars we found? They've been tampered with, Agatha interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm. Someone has altered my marmalade. Caroline sighed audibly. Mother, really, I know my own creation, Agatha insisted. The colour is wrong, the consistency different. Someone has tried to replicate my recipe and failed. Miss Marple settled into a chair beside her old friend. When you say altered, Agatha, what exactly do you mean? I mean, Jane, that someone has substituted their own inferior product while stealing mine. And I believe I know why. She glanced meaningfully at Craddock. Have you looked where I suggested? The inspector nodded. We've examined the area under the apple tree. The ground has been disturbed, but we haven't found anything yet. Dig deeper, Agatha said grimly. Harold always said that tree was the guardian of secrets. Caroline made a small, distressed sound. Mother, you're not making sense. Father meant that metaphorically. It's where he proposed to you. Is it, Caroline? Agatha's voice had acquired an edge. Are you quite certain that's all he meant? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Miss Marple noticed Timothy hovering in the doorway, his young face troubled. Gran, he ventured, Dr. Graves is here again. He says he needs to check on you. Tell him I'm perfectly fine and require no further interventions. Agatha replied tartly. I'll speak to him, Caroline said, rising quickly. As she passed her son, Miss Marple noticed her hand brush against his, passing something small between them. Once Caroline had left, Timothy approached his grandmother. Gran, I need to tell you something about last night. Not now, dear, Agatha cut him off, her eyes never leaving Inspector Craddock. Inspector, I believe you should know that my husband's papers contained information that some might find valuable. Information unrelated to Marmalade. Miss Marple's knitting needles emerged from her bag, a sign she was processing complex thoughts. Agatha, perhaps you're referring to your husband's work with the ministry during the war. Agatha's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. As observant as ever, Jane. Yes, Harold's work included some sensitive matters. Matters that certain parties might still be interested in, even after all these years. Craddock leaned forward. Mrs. Blackwood, are you suggesting the break-in was about classified information, not a marmalade recipe? I'm suggesting, Inspector, that in this village things are rarely what they seem. She glanced toward the window where Eliza Hartley could be seen hovering near the garden gate, apparently examining the roses despite the season. And some competitions run far deeper than village festivals. Timothy shifted uncomfortably. Gran, I really think, Timothy, Agatha interrupted again, this time with a gentle firmness. Fetch my old photograph album from the library, would you, dear? The one with the blue cover. Once the young man had left, Agatha lowered her voice. Inspector, when you dig under that tree, I believe you'll find something that explains everything. Harold buried it there in 1963, the night before he died. Died? Miss Marple echoed softly. I thought Harold passed away in his sleep. That's what everyone was told, Agatha replied, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. The truth is rather more complicated. The door opened, and Dr. Graves entered without waiting for an invitation, Caroline close behind him. Mrs. Blackwood, he said briskly, you shouldn't be exerting yourself. And you, Doctor, Agatha replied with surprising steel in her voice, shouldn't be dispensing sedatives so freely. I am neither infirm nor senile. Miss Marple caught a flash of something, annoyance, concern, crossed the doctor's handsome features before his professional smile reasserted itself. Of course not, he soothed. I'm merely concerned about your blood pressure after such excitement. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the garden. Sergeant Davis appeared at the door, his face flushed with excitement. Inspector, he said, breathlessly, you need to see this. We've found something buried under the tree. Chapter 4. Buried Truths. The tin box they unearthed from beneath the apple tree was small and weathered, its once bright surface dulled by decades of soil contact. Inspector Craddock carefully placed it on the garden table, where it sat like a relic from another time, which Miss Marple supposed it was. Has anyone opened it yet? She inquired, approaching with measured steps. No, Craddock replied. I thought Mrs. Blackwood should be present. Agatha Blackwood had insisted on being brought outside, despite Dr. Graves's protests. Now she sat in a wheelchair, a blanket across her knees despite the mild day, her eyes fixed on the box with an intensity that belied her frail appearance. After all these years, she murmured. Harold always said it would come to light eventually. Caroline stood behind her mother's wheelchair, her knuckles white where she gripped the handles. Mother, perhaps we should do this privately. Nonsense, Agatha replied firmly. Inspector Craddock is here in an official capacity, and Jane— She glanced at Miss Marple with a faint smile. Well, Jane has always known more than she lets on. Dr. Graves hovered nearby, ostensibly monitoring his patient, but with eyes that kept returning to the box. Miss Marple noticed how his professional detachment seemed to slip whenever the container was mentioned. "Open it, Inspector," Agatha commanded. With gloved hands, Craddock carefully pried open the rusted lid. Inside lay several yellowed envelopes, a small leather notebook, and wrapped in waxed paper, a folded document that appeared to be the original marmalade recipe. The recipe was a decoy, Agatha explained, her voice steady now. Harold knew someone might come looking for his papers some day. He thought hiding them with something as innocuous as a family recipe would provide an extra layer of protection. Protection? From what exactly? Craddock asked, carefully lifting out the leather notebook. From people who might misuse information that was never meant to be public. Agatha's eyes drifted toward the garden gate, where Eliza Hartley had retreated, but remained watching from a distance. People with long memories and old grudges. Timothy, who had returned with the photo album only to find the room empty, now joined them in the garden. "Gran, what's going on?" "History, my dear," Agatha replied cryptically. "Family history." Craddock had opened the notebook and was scanning its contents, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Mrs. Blackwood, these appear to be notes regarding military operations during the war. This should rightfully be in government hands." "And so it shall be," Agatha agreed. "But first, I believe you'll find a letter addressed to me. That belongs to the family, not the Crown." The inspector carefully sorted through the envelopes until he found one with Agatha's name inscribed in faded blue ink. He handed it to her without comment. Caroline leaned forward. "Mother, what is this about? Father was an accountant for the Ministry of Agriculture." "Was he?" Agatha's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope. "That's what his paperwork said, certainly. But your father had many talents, Caroline. Languages, for one. He spoke German like a native." Miss Marple's needles paused momentarily. "I recall Harold mentioning once that he had studied in Berlin before the war. Most unusual for that time." "Yes," Agatha confirmed. "He lived there from 1932 to 1937. He made connections." Timothy's eyes widened. "Are you saying grandfather was a spy?" A small, sad smile curved Agatha's lips. "Such dramatic terms. He preferred intelligence analyst." "This is absurd," Caroline protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "If father was involved in intelligence work, why would anyone care now? It's been over 40 years since his death." "Some secrets don't expire with the men who keep them," Agatha replied, carefully opening the envelope. "And some recipes contain ingredients that remain potent despite the passage of time." Miss Marple watched as Dr. Graves shifted uncomfortably, his professional demeanour slipping further. His eyes remained fixed on the letter in Agatha's hands. "Doctor," she said mildly, "you seem most concerned about Mrs. Blackwood's health today. Have you been her physician long?" "Only since I arrived in the village," he replied too quickly. "Professional concern, nothing more." "Of course," Miss Marple nodded, "though I recall my nephew Raymond once commenting on how certain professions provide excellent cover for those seeking information. Doctors, for instance, can ask the most intrusive questions without raising suspicion." Dr. Graves stiffened. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "Oh, I'm not implying anything," Miss Marple assured him with a gentle smile. "Merely making an observation." Agatha had removed a single sheet of paper from the envelope and was reading it silently, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, there was a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow in her eyes. "It's as I thought," she said quietly. "Harold knew they would come for him eventually. He wrote this the night before he died." She folded the letter carefully. "Caroline, your father didn't die of heart failure. He was poisoned." A collective gasp rose from those gathered. Caroline's face drained of colour. "Poisoned? But that's impossible. The doctor said—" "The doctor said what he was told to say," Agatha cut in. "Harold predicted it all. He even suspected it would happen at the Seville Orange Festival that year." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "The festival? But that would suggest—" "Yes," Agatha nodded. "The Marmalade. Someone tampered with his breakfast preserve that morning. By lunch, he was gone." Inspector Craddock looked stunned. "Mrs. Blackwood, these are extremely serious allegations. Why didn't you come forward at the time?" "Because I had no proof," Agatha replied simply. "Only suspicions and a husband who had warned me that making accusations could put Caroline in danger. She was only 16 then." Her gaze settled on her daughter's shocked face. "I chose her safety over justice." Dr. Graves cleared his throat. "This is clearly distressing, Mrs. Blackwood. I think we should continue this another time. I think," said Miss Marple gently but firmly, "that we should hear what else Agatha has to say." She turned to her old friend. "The recipe wasn't stolen for the Marmalade secrets at all, was it?" "No," Agatha confirmed. "The recipe itself is ordinary enough. But Harold used the back of it to write down names of people who might one day come looking for what he knew." Her eyes drifted to the garden gate again, then to Dr. Graves, and finally, most painfully, to Caroline. Some of those names were unexpected. Timothy stepped forward. "Gran, I need to tell you something. Last night I did go to the garden shed. I saw someone. A crash from the kitchen interrupted him. Sergeant Davis hurried in from the house. "Inspector, someone's been through the kitchen. The back door was forced open." Craddock stood immediately. "When?" "Just now, sir." "I heard the noise and went to investigate, but they'd already fled. Left this behind, though." He held up a torn piece of paper that appeared to be a fragment of a photograph. Miss Marple leaned forward to examine it. The fragment showed part of a group picture, with a young Harold Blackwood clearly visible among several other men in uniform. The edge of another figure could be seen beside him, but the rest had been torn away. "That's from my wedding album," Agatha said, her voice suddenly weak. "The full photograph was in the album I asked Timothy to bring." All eyes turned to the blue album that lay forgotten on a nearby chair. Timothy reached for it and began turning pages. "It's gone," he confirmed after a moment. "Page 17 has been torn out." Inspector Craddock looked grimly at his sergeant. "Secure the house. No one enters or leaves without my authorization." He turned to the gathered family. "I believe this case has just become considerably more complex than missing Marmalade." As the police hurried to secure the premises, Miss Marple noticed how Dr. Graves's hand had moved to his pocket, as if checking that something was still there. The gesture was quick, professional, and revealing. "Marmalade," she murmured almost, to herself. "Such a simple preserve, yet so dependent on balance. Too much sugar masks the true flavour. Too little, and the bitterness overwhelms." Only Agatha seemed to understand her meaning, nodding slowly as shadows of the past continued to lengthen across the sunlit garden. Chapter 5. Bitter Seeds. The Blackwood house had been transformed into a hive of police activity. Uniformed officers secured the perimeter, while Craddock had commandeered the drawing room as a temporary headquarters. The tin box and its contents were carefully catalogued, photographed and placed in evidence bags, all except Harold's letter to Agatha, which Inspector Craddock had reluctantly allowed her to keep as it contained no official information, merely personal sentiments. Miss Marple had been permitted to stay, ostensibly to provide comfort to Agatha, though both women knew her presence served a dual purpose. She sat now in a corner of the drawing-room, seemingly absorbed in her knitting, while acute ears missed nothing of the conversation swirling around her. "I still don't understand why anyone would care about Father's war work after all this time," Caroline was saying, her composure regained somewhat, though her hands still trembled as she sipped her tea. Surely any intelligence from back then would be worthless now. Inspector Craddock, who had been conferring with a senior officer on the telephone, rejoined the conversation. "Not necessarily, Mrs. Ellis. Some wartime intelligence operations remained classified for decades because they involved deep-cover agents who continued their work well into the Cold War. But Father died in 1963, Caroline protested. "The height of the Cold War," Craddock pointed out. "Your mother seems to believe your father's death wasn't accidental." "Nonsense," Dr. Graves interjected from where he stood by the fireplace. Had refused to leave despite the inspector's hints that his presence was no longer required. Heart failure is a common cause of death, especially in men under stress. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she observed, "How curious that you should diagnose a patient you never examined, Doctor, particularly one who died before you were born." Dr. Graves flushed slightly. "Medical records are quite clear in retrospect, and medical science has advanced significantly." "Indeed it has," Miss Marple agreed mildly. "My great-nephew Raymond was telling me just last month about new tests that can detect poisons in the body years after death. Quite remarkable." The doctor's expression remained professionally neutral, but Miss Marple noted how his left hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his medical bag. Timothy entered the room, having been interviewed by Sergeant Davis in the kitchen. The young man looked drained, the initial excitement of adventure replaced by genuine concern. "Gran," he said, approaching Agatha's chair, "the police want to know if anything else is missing from the album, besides that one photograph." Agatha shook her head. "I don't believe so, but my eyes aren't what they once were." "Perhaps you could check, dear." As Timothy began carefully examining the album, Eliza Hartley appeared at the drawing-room door, having somehow persuaded the constable on duty to admit her. "Agatha, this is intolerable," she declared. "The entire village is buzzing with rumours. Someone said the police found a body under your apple tree." "No body, Miss Hartley," Craddock replied firmly, "and I would appreciate it if you would refrain from spreading unfounded gossip." "Well, something has clearly happened," Eliza persisted, her eyes darting around the room, taking in the evidence bags and police activity. "First the Marmalade disappears, and now this. It's most irregular." Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. "People do so love irregularities, don't they? They break the monotony of village life." She smiled benignly at Eliza. "Though I've often observed that those who appear most scandalized by disruption are frequently those who benefit from it." Eliza bristled. "What exactly are you implying, Jane?" "Oh, I'm not implying anything," Miss Marple replied. merely making an observation about human nature. My friend Mrs. Bantry always says that opportunity makes the thief. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with Agatha's missing marmalade—" "No one is accusing you, Eliza," Agatha interrupted, her voice tired but firm. "Though your interest in our family's affairs has always been rather intense." A tense silence fell over the room. Inspector Craddock seized the opportunity to intervene. "Miss Hartley, I understand you were Agatha's neighbour during the time of her husband's death. Did you notice anything unusual on the day Mr. Blackwood passed away?" For a moment, Eliza seemed genuinely startled by the question. Harold's death? But that was decades ago. What could that possibly have to do with a stolen recipe? "Indulge me," Craddock pressed. Eliza's gaze flicked briefly toward Dr. Graves before she answered. "It was a normal morning, as I recall. Harold left for work, then returned unexpectedly an hour later. He looked unwell. By afternoon the doctor had been called, and by evening, well, it was all very sudden. He returned home." Caroline looked puzzled. "I don't remember that. I was at school, then came home to find—" Her voice broke. "Memory plays such tricks," Eliza murmured, "especially the memories of a 16-year-old girl in shock." Timothy, who had been quietly examining the photo album, suddenly straightened. "There's something else missing. Look, Gran." He pointed to a page where the corner pocket clearly showed signs of disturbance. "Wasn't this where you kept Grandfather's medal?" Agatha leaned forward, alarm crossing her features. "Yes, his Distinguished Service Order. It should be there with his citation." Inspector Craddock moved to examine the album. "When did you last see the medal, Mrs. Blackwood?" "Last week, when I was showing Timothy some family history," Agatha replied, her distress evident. "I always kept it with the photographs." Miss Marple set her knitting aside. "Medals often have numbers engraved on them, don't they? Individual identification numbers?" "Yes," Craddock confirmed. "Particularly higher honours like the DSO. And records of such honours would be kept somewhere official, I imagine." "At the Ministry of Defence," Craddock nodded, understanding dawning. If someone wanted to verify a person's service record, or create a false identity based on a deceased war hero, Miss Marple suggested quietly. Dr. Graves cleared his throat. "This is all getting rather melodramatic. A missing recipe, an old medal, hardly the stuff of espionage." "You seem remarkably eager to downplay these events, Doctor," Craddock observed. "May I ask why you're still here? Surely Mrs. Blackwood is stable now?" "Professional concern," the doctor replied stiffly. "And as a relative newcomer to the village, I find this insight into its history educational." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "How fortunate for St. Mary Mead to have a doctor so interested in local history. Though I believe you mentioned once that you had connections to the area before taking up your practice. Family ties, perhaps?" "The Duigave." Doctor's composure slipped momentarily. "Distant ones. Nothing significant." "Even distant ties can exert remarkable influence," Miss Marple observed. "Like the bitter oils in orange peel, present in tiny amounts, yet capable of transforming the entire preserve." Agatha looked up sharply at this, her eyes moving between Miss Marple and Dr. Graves. "Jane, do you remember the summer of 1962, when Harold brought that young man to dinner? The university student researching agricultural methods. Indeed, Miss Marple nodded. A very intense young man with an interest in your husband's wartime experiences. He asked such specific questions about Berlin. I believe his name was Graves, Agatha continued, her gaze fixed on the doctor. Not a common name, is it? The room fell silent. Dr. Graves' professional demeanour fractured, revealing a flash of something cold beneath. My father, he admitted finally. Robert Graves. He died in 1980. How interesting, Miss Marple remarked. And yet, when you arrived in St. Mary Mead last year, you never mentioned this connection. It seemed irrelevant, the doctor replied, his tone carefully controlled. A brief acquaintance decades ago. Inspector Craddock stepped forward. Dr. Graves, I think you should accompany us to the station to answer some questions. On what grounds? The doctor demanded. Having a father who once dined with the Blackwoods is hardly suspicious. Perhaps not, Craddock conceded, but accessing Mrs. Blackwood's medical records without proper authorization might be. We checked with the previous doctor this morning. He has no record of transferring her files to you, yet you seem remarkably well informed about her health history. As the inspector spoke, Miss Marple noticed Timothy slide quietly toward the door, his young face a mask of conflicted emotions. Only she observed how his hand slipped into his pocket, where something small and metallic gleamed briefly. Something that looked remarkably like a Distinguished Service Order medal. Chapter 6. A Spoonful of Deception. The evening shadows had lengthened across St. Mary Mead by the time Inspector Craddock returned to the Blackwood residence. The police presence had diminished somewhat, though a constable still stood guard at the garden gate. Miss Marple, who had departed briefly to feed her cat and change her cardigan, found herself invited back by a surprisingly insistent call from Caroline. Jane? Agatha greeted her with evident relief as she entered the drawing-room. Thank goodness! Some clarity is desperately needed. The room had been restored to a semblance of order, though the absence of the photo album and other family mementos, now in police custody, left noticeable gaps on the side tables. Timothy was conspicuously absent. Dr. Graves has been formally detained, Craddock informed them as he accepted a cup of tea from Caroline, though he continues to deny any wrongdoing. What exactly is he suspected of? Caroline asked, her composure remarkably restored given the day's revelations. Illegally accessing medical records for a start, Craddock replied, and we have questions about his true identity. The General Medical Council has no record of a Martin Graves qualifying from the university he claims to have attended. Nikismir, Marple's knitting needles resumed their rhythmic clicking. False credentials are often the first sign of deeper deceptions. My friend Sir Henry Clithering of Scotland Yard always says that a man who lies about his qualifications will lie about his actions. Indeed, Craddock agreed. We're also looking into his movements over the past year, particularly his visits to certain government archives where wartime intelligence records are kept. But what could he possibly want after all these years? Caroline pressed. Father's work, whatever it was, surely has no relevance today. Agatha, who had been silent until now, carefully placed her teacup on its saucer. It wasn't what Harold knew, Caroline. It was who he knew. She glanced at Miss Marple. Jane, do you recall Hermann Steiner? Miss Marple paused her knitting. The German businessman who visited you several times after the war. Of course, a very polite gentleman with that distinctive scar along his jawline. He wasn't a businessman, Agatha said quietly. He was one of Harold's contacts during the war, a high-ranking intelligence officer who provided valuable information to the Allies. After the war, he was given a new identity and brought to England. Harold remained his handler until 1962. Craddock leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you saying your husband was running a former German agent here in St. Mary Mead?" "Not exactly running," Agatha corrected. "Protecting. Steiner had made powerful enemies on both sides. The information he provided saved countless lives. But there were those who considered him a traitor rather than a hero." Caroline looked stunned. "I remember Herr Steiner. He brought me a porcelain doll from Dresden." Her voice faltered. "He stopped visiting after Father died. Because he had to disappear again," Agatha explained. "Harold's last act was to arrange a new identity for him. The names in that notebook, they were Steiner's potential new placements. Only Harold knew which one was actually used." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And the medal? Was that part of the new identity?" "Yes," Agatha confirmed. "The citation was altered to match Steiner's new name. A complicated operation, but Harold was always thorough." The room fell silent as the implications settled. Finally, Caroline spoke, her voice strained. "Are you saying Dr. Graves, or whoever he is looking for this man Steiner? But why? What could he possibly want from an elderly German spy? Revenge, perhaps," Craddock suggested, "or information that only Steiner possesses." "Or confirmation," Miss Marple added softly. "Some people spend their lives seeking certainty about the past." Agatha nodded. "Robert Graves, the doctor's father, if that part of his story is true, was obsessed with proving that certain German officers had secretly worked with the Allies. He believed they'd been rewarded rather than punished after the war. He wasn't entirely wrong." "Mother," Caroline said suddenly, "where is Timothy? He should be here for this." A troubled look crossed Agatha's face. "He said he was going to his room to lie down. The excitement was too much." Miss Marple set her knitting aside. "Perhaps someone should check on him. Young men often take matters into their own hands when they believe they're protecting family." Craddock rose immediately. "I'll go." He returned moments later, his expression grave. "He's not there. His window is open, and there's a rope made of sheets." "Oh, Timothy," Caroline moaned. "What have you done?" Miss Marple's voice remained calm. "When did you last see the medal, Caroline? The truth, please." Caroline's composure finally cracked. "Timothy had it," she admitted. "He found it in the garden shed yesterday morning, along with a note. He thought it was some kind of treasure hunt. He didn't understand the significance." "What note?" Craddock demanded. "It said to bring the medal to the old boathouse at Gossington Hall tonight at 9 o'clock if he wanted to learn the truth about his grandfather." Caroline's hands twisted in her lap. "I told him to give everything to the police, but he said it was family business." Craddock checked his watch. "It's nearly 8:30 now. We have time to intercept him." He turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Blackwood, is there anything else about Steiner that might be relevant? Any identifying features besides the scar?" Agatha hesitated. "He had a distinctive way of preparing his tea. 3 spoons of sugar stirred counterclockwise. Harold used to tease him about it, and he always carried a silver pocket watch that played a few notes of Mozart when opened. Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly. How interesting! I believe I may have observed something similar quite recently. Before she could elaborate, a commotion at the front door interrupted them. Eliza Hartley burst in, her usual composure entirely abandoned. "They've arrested Martin!" she exclaimed. "Police came to his house, took boxes of papers. What is happening, Agatha?" "You seem remarkably concerned about the doctor's welfare, Eliza," Agatha observed coolly. "Of course I am," Eliza retorted. "He's been treating my arthritis for months. Such a knowledgeable man, so interested in local history. Particularly the history of certain families," Miss Marple noted. "I recall seeing him at the library researching the parish records. Most diligent." Eliza shot her a suspicious glance. "What are you implying?" "Nothing at all," Miss Marple replied serenely. "Merely that Dr. Graves seems to have taken a special interest in the Blackwood family, as have you over the years." "We've been neighbours for decades," Eliza said defensively. "Indeed, and yet," Miss Marple continued, her voice gentle but relentless, "I do find it curious that your interest in Agatha's marmalade recipe has been so persistent, almost as if you suspected it contained something beyond oranges and sugar." Inspector Craddock, who had been about to leave, paused at the door. "Miss Hartley, when exactly did you become acquainted with Dr. Graves?" "When he arrived in the village, naturally," Eliza replied, but a flush had crept into her cheeks. "Curious," Miss Marple murmured, "because I distinctly recall seeing you in conversation with him at the train station 2 days before his official arrival. You seemed quite familiar. With each other, then?" Eliza's face hardened. "You always did see too much, Jane Marple." "Not too much," Miss Marple corrected mildly. "Just enough. Like noticing how you stir your tea counterclockwise with 3 sugars. A rather distinctive habit." The room fell silent as the implication of her words registered. Agatha stared at her neighbour of 30 years with dawning comprehension. "Eliza," she whispered, "or should I say, Herman?" Chapter 7. The Mask. Slips. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Eliza Hartley stood perfectly still, her expression frozen somewhere between defiance and resignation. Then, almost imperceptibly, her posture changed, shoulders straightening, chin lifting with a dignity that had been carefully concealed beneath decades of affected feminine mannerisms. "Agatha," she said, and even her voice had altered, the pitch slightly deeper, the accent touched with a foreign cadence previously disguised. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this." Craddock moved swiftly to position himself between Eliza and the door. "Miss Hartley, or whoever you are, I must ask you to remain where you are." "Herman," Agatha whispered again, disbelief etched across her features. "All these years, living next door, how did I not see it?" "Because you saw what you expected to see," Eliza, or rather Herman Steiner, replied, "a lonely spinster with a passion for gardening and village gossip. Harold always said the best disguise was one that invited dismissal rather than scrutiny." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "The forgotten women of English villages have always possessed a certain invisibility, so convenient for someone wishing to disappear." Caroline had risen to her feet, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. When she finally found her voice, It emerged as barely more than a whisper. Father knew about this. He arranged for you to live as a woman. It was my suggestion, Steiner admitted. After the war, certain parties were looking for a man. No one would look twice at Eliza Hartley, spinster aunt of a deceased British officer, returning to the family cottage after years abroad. Perfect cover, Craddock observed grimly. Until Dr. Graves arrived. Who is he, exactly? A shadow crossed Steiner's face. The son of a most persistent man. Robert Graves was with German counterintelligence. He suspected my true loyalties, but could never prove them. He spent years trying to track down agents who had worked with the Allies. And now his son has taken up the hunt, Miss Marple concluded. How troubling when children inherit their parents' vendettas. Yes, Steiner agreed. Though Martin Graves is not Robert's son, he is his nephew. The real Martin Graves died in 1983. This impostor has been using his identity to gain access to classified files and medical records. Agatha leaned forward. But why emerge now, after all these years? What changed? Digitization, Steiner explained simply. Old files being transferred to computer systems, cross-referenced in ways that weren't possible before. Connections being made. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone found the irregularities in Harold's records. The marmalade recipe, Miss Marple prompted. That was never about the competition at all, was it? A faint smile touched Steiner's lips. No. When Harold realized he had been poisoned, he used his last hours to create a safety mechanism. He took the list of my potential, new identities, and hid it beneath the text of Agatha's famous recipe using invisible ink. If I ever needed to establish my legitimacy, the recipe would prove my connection to British intelligence. And the medal? Craddock asked. Insurance, Steiner replied. The serial number, when properly decoded, reveals the authorization code for my pension from the British government. A pension that continues to this day through a very discreet banking arrangement. Caroline sank back into her chair. This is madness, complete madness. No, my dear, Steiner said gently. This is the shadow world your father inhabited, a world of necessary deceptions and fluid identities. Miss Marple's knitting needles resumed their rhythmic movement. And Timothy? What does he have to do with this increasingly complex web? Steiner's expression hardened. Nothing. He is an innocent who should remain so. He turned to Craddock. Inspector, we must find him immediately. The man calling himself Dr. Graves is dangerous. He believes Timothy knows where certain microfilms are hidden. Films that would identify other agents who worked with me. Microfilms? Agatha looked bewildered. Harold never mentioned any films. Because he didn't know about them, Steiner admitted. I concealed them shortly before his death. I feared something might happen to him. He had been asking too many questions in Berlin. A sudden, horrifying realization dawned on Agatha's face. You think Harold was poisoned because of you? Because of these films? I have lived with that possibility for decades. Steiner replied, genuine remorse in his voice. It is why I remained close, to protect you and Caroline as best I could, without revealing my true identity. Craddock cut in decisively. We need to focus on finding Timothy. The boathouse at Gossington Hall, you said. Caroline nodded, visibly struggling to process the cascading revelations. Yes, 9 o'clock. But how did this false doctor even know about Timothy and the medal? He's been watching the house, Steiner explained. Probably intercepted my note to Timothy. I had hoped to retrieve the medal quietly and disappear again. And the garden shed? Miss Marple inquired. The disturbed earth beneath the apple tree? My doing, Steiner admitted. I needed to create a diversion, something significant enough to draw attention, but not so alarming as to involve the police immediately. I hoped to resolve matters before it came to this. Craddock checked his watch again. It's nearly 9. We need to get to Gossington Hall now. He turned to Steiner. You're coming with us, under my authority. I'm not prepared to trust you completely. A wise decision, Inspector, Steiner acknowledged with a dignified nod. Though I should warn you that my days of physical heroics are long behind me. As they prepared to leave, Miss Marple rose from her chair. I believe I should accompany you, she said firmly. Timothy knows me, and in situations of high emotion, a familiar face can be most reassuring. Craddock hesitated only briefly before nodding. Very well, but you'll remain in the car until we've secured the area. Agatha reached for her shawl. I'm coming too. He's my grandson. Mother, you can't, Caroline protested. Your health has been exaggerated for dramatic effect. Agatha cut in crisply. Another useful deception, though in my case it was primarily to elicit information from our false doctor. I wanted to see what he would do if he thought I was vulnerable. As they moved toward the door, Steiner paused beside Agatha. I am truly sorry for the deception, my dear friend. For what it's worth, your marmalade really is exceptional, far superior to my attempts. The competition jars in the shed, Agatha realized. Those were yours? A poor imitation, Steiner admitted. I never could get the balance of bitter and sweet quite right. Few can, Miss Marple observed as they stepped out into the evening air. In preserves as in life, that balance is the most elusive quality of all. The journey to Gossington Hall took place in tense silence. As they approached the long tree-lined drive leading to the old manor house, Craddock instructed the driver to kill the headlights. The boathouse, a Victorian folly perched at the edge of what had once been an ornamental lake, but was now little more than a large pond, stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. There's a light inside, Craddock observed, peering through binoculars. And 2 figures. One appears to be Timothy. And the other? Caroline asked anxiously. Craddock lowered the binoculars, his expression grim. Not Dr. Graves, someone else entirely. Chapter 8. Reflections on Dark Water. The boathouse at Gossington Hall had seen better days. Once a charming Victorian folly, where ladies in white dresses had trailed their fingers in cool water while gentlemen rowed ornate boats across the lake, it now stood weathered and somewhat forlorn. The lake itself had shrunk to a pond, choked with reeds and water lilies, its surface reflecting the pale glow of the rising moon. Inspector Craddock assembled his small team at the edge of the overgrown path leading to the structure. 2 constables had joined them, summoned by radio from the village police station. The inspector's voice was low as he outlined his plan. Webster, circle around to the back. Davis, take the left approach. I'll go directly to the front. No one moves until I give the signal. He turned to the others. You'll all remain here until I determine it's safe. That would be most unwise, Inspector, Steiner murmured. If the person inside is who I suspect, a direct approach could be dangerous. And who exactly do you suspect? Craddock demanded. Steiner's eyes, Eliza Hartley's eyes, remained fixed on the boathouse. The one person we've overlooked. The one who has had access to everything from the beginning. Miss Marple nodded slowly. I believe Mr. Steiner is referring to Caroline's husband, or rather, her ex-husband. Caroline gasped. James? But that's absurd. He's in London. We've been divorced for months. Has anyone actually verified his whereabouts? Miss Marple asked gently. Sometimes the most obvious connections escape our notice precisely because they are so obvious. Before Caroline could respond, Agatha placed a restraining hand on her arm. The man who visited you in London last month, he wasn't a colleague of James, was he? No, Caroline admitted after a moment's hesitation. He said he was with some government department. He asked questions about father's papers, whether I'd kept anything after his death. And you told him about the recipe, Agatha concluded. Mentioned that you'd kept father's notes with your recipes, Caroline said defensively. I didn't think it mattered after all these years. Craddock's patience was visibly wearing thin. This historical review is fascinating, but there's a 17-year-old boy in that boathouse who needs our help. As if in response to his words, a shaft of light briefly illuminated the path as the boathouse door opened. Two silhouettes were visible, one clearly Timothy's lanky form, the other a taller, broader figure. They appeared to be engaged in conversation, their voices carrying faintly across the water, though the words were indistinct. He's not in immediate danger, Craddock observed, but we need to get closer. Miss Marple suddenly reached into her handbag and produced an object that glinted in the moonlight, a small silver pocket watch. Perhaps this might be useful, she suggested. I found it in the garden shed this morning when I went to examine the marmalade jars. Steiner stared at the watch with evident surprise. You've had it all this time? I thought it might be significant, Miss Marple explained, particularly when I noticed the Mozart inscription inside. The recognition signal, Steiner breathed. If Timothy shows this to whoever is in there. Craddock hesitated only briefly before taking the watch. I'll approach first. If there's any sign of trouble, we'll implement a full extraction. He turned to Steiner. Stay with the ladies. That's an order. With careful, measured steps, Craddock began making his way toward the boathouse. The path was treacherous in the dim light, tangled with brambles and fallen branches. Behind him, the small group waited tensely, straining to hear the conversation taking place ahead. It's not working, Caroline whispered after a moment. He's too far away. Timothy won't be able to see the watch. Miss Marple laid a calming hand on her arm. Patience, my dear. The inspector knows what he's doing. But as Craddock drew closer to the boathouse, the door suddenly closed, plunging the path back into darkness. A moment later, there was a sharp cry, followed by a splash. Timothy! Caroline lunged forward, only to be restrained by Steiner's surprisingly strong grip. Wait, he commanded. We don't know what's happening. The sound of running footsteps reached them. Then a beam of light swept across the water, a powerful torch in Craddock's hand. It illuminated the pond's surface, where ripples spread outward from a central disturbance. Someone's in the water, Craddock called back. Davis, get a rope. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Constable Davis sprinted to the car for rescue equipment, while Craddock continued to track the splashing figure with his torch. As the beam steadied, they could see Timothy struggling in the water, weighed down by his sodden clothes but managing to keep his head above the surface. "Hold on, lad," Craddock called. "Help is coming." Without warning, a second figure appeared at the boathouse door. A man silhouetted against the light inside. He raised what appeared to be a small object in his hand, pointing it toward Timothy in the water. "Gun!" Craddock shouted, drawing his own weapon. "Police, drop your weapon immediately!" Instead of complying, the man fired, not at Timothy, but at Craddock. The shot went wide, splintering wood on a nearby tree. The inspector dove for cover as Constables Webster and Davis converged on the boathouse from different directions. Caroline broke free from Steiner's grasp and ran towards the water's edge. "Timothy, swim to me!" "Stay back!" Craddock ordered sharply, but his voice was drowned out by another gunshot. In the confusion that followed, few noticed Steiner slipping away from the group, moving with surprising agility for someone of his advanced years. He circled wide around the pond, using the dense shrubbery as cover, approaching the boathouse from the blind side, where decades ago boats would have been lowered into the water. Miss Marple, however, observed his movement with knowing eyes. She turned to Agatha, who stood frozen with fear for her grandson. "Agatha, dear, I believe we should create a small diversion. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep everyone's attention towards the front of the boathouse." Understanding dawned in Agatha's eyes. "Of course," she raised her voice, calling out with surprising strength. "James Ellis, I know it's you in there. What have you done with my grandson?" The strategy worked. The man in the doorway turned towards the sound of Agatha's voice, momentarily distracted. In that instant, Timothy redoubled his efforts to swim toward the shore where his mother waited, and Craddock seized the opportunity to signal his officers to advance. What no one expected was the second man who emerged from the shadows behind the boathouse. Dr. Graves, his medical bag clutched in one hand, a determined expression on his face. He had apparently tracked them from the village, following at a discreet distance. "Steiner!" he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "I know you're here. Show yourself!" The standoff had now become dangerously complex. Timothy struggling in the water, James Ellis armed in the doorway, police officers converging from multiple directions, and Dr. Graves lurking at the periphery, hunting for Steiner. Miss Marple alone remained perfectly calm, her pale blue eyes taking in every detail of the unfolding drama. She alone noticed the slight movement beneath the rotting wooden jetty that extended from the boathouse into the pond, a place where a person might conceal themselves while accessing the structure from below. "Inspector," she called out softly, but clearly, "I believe you'll find what you're looking for beneath your feet." Chapter 9. The Watch Strikes. 9 Inspector Craddock processed Miss Marple's cryptic message in an instant. Without taking his eyes off James Ellis, he stamped his foot twice on the wooden jetty. The hollow sound confirmed what Miss Marple had already deduced. The structure was not entirely solid. "Police, come out from under there!" Craddock commanded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a creak of ancient timbers, a section of the jetty hinged upward, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. From this unexpected hiding place emerged Steiner, water dripping from his clothes, Eliza Hartley's wig gone, revealing close-cropped silver hair. Ellis, Steiner acknowledged, his voice steady despite his drenched condition. I suspected it might be you. James Ellis, for it was indeed Caroline's ex-husband, kept his weapon trained on Steiner. Hermann Steiner, the man who ruined my father's career and stole his life's work. Your father. Steiner's expression registered genuine confusion. I don't understand. Colonel Richard Ellis, James spat. MI6. He was assigned to debrief you after the war. You fed him false information that led to the deaths of 3 British agents in East Berlin. Timothy had finally reached the shore, where Caroline pulled him from the water, wrapping her coat around his shivering form. The young man coughed violently, expelling pond water, but his eyes remained fixed on the confrontation unfolding before him. Your father was Richard Ellis? Steiner shook his head slowly. Impossible. Richard Ellis died childless in 1975. I attended his funeral myself. A convenient fiction, James retorted. My adoption was kept secret to protect me from people like you. But father made sure I knew everything, including how to find you when the time was right. Miss Marple, who had moved closer to the water's edge while maintaining a safe distance, spoke with quiet authority. Mr. Ellis, I believe you may be operating under a misapprehension. According to my understanding, Colonel Ellis was indeed childless when he died. What would you know about it, old woman? James snapped. Very little directly, Miss Marple admitted. But my nephew Raymond once worked at the Foreign Office and mentioned the Ellis case as a particularly tragic one. A dedicated officer whose career was destroyed by false accusations of treachery. Dr. Graves had been edging closer during this exchange. Now he stepped forward, his expression triumphant. She's lying. Richard Ellis was framed by this man. He gestured toward Steiner, who has been living comfortably as a British pensioner ever since, while true patriots suffered. Craddock, seeing the situation deteriorating, attempted to reassert control. Everyone stay calm. Mr. Ellis, lower your weapon immediately. Instead, James tightened his grip. Not until I have what I came for. The microfilms, Steiner. Where are they? There are no microfilms, Steiner replied wearily. That was always a fiction. A rumor I started myself to protect the real intelligence, which was much more mundane, but far more valuable. Names memorized, not recorded. Liar! James's hand shook with rage. My father's notes mentioned them specifically, hidden in something preserved. A flash of understanding crossed Agatha's face. The Marmalade, she breathed. All these years, the annual batches of Marmalade. Steiner nodded slowly. A perfect hiding place. Each year, I would provide Harold with 3 key names, agents still active behind the Iron Curtain. He would memorize them, then destroy the evidence. But to ensure the information survived if something happened to either of us, he developed a simple code. 3 distinctive bitter strands in each jar of competition marmalade, positioned to represent coordinates on a map. Coordinates to what? Craddock asked. To nothing tangible, Steiner explained. The positions themselves were the code. They could be converted to names using a cipher that only 2 people knew. Harold and his superior in London. Colonel Ellis, James insisted. My father? No. Steiner shook his head. Richard Ellis was never Harold's superior. He was a field agent, like me. Harold reported directly to Sir Geoffrey Manning. The name hung in the air for a moment before Dr. Graves let out a harsh laugh. Manning? The traitor who defected to Moscow in 1963. He never defected, Steiner corrected. That was the cover story. He was assassinated, poisoned, just like Harold, when someone realized he was running a network of double agents inside the Soviet military. The Soviets wanted the world to think he had betrayed Britain, not the other way around. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. And the recipe you've been trying to recover, Mr. Ellis, was never about marmalade at all. It was Harold Blackwood's final message. The identities of the moles in Soviet intelligence, preserved in the only way he could manage, as the poison took effect. James's weapon wavered slightly. No, you're confusing me. My father's notes were clear. Steiner hid microfilms in something preserved in the Blackwood house. The family recipe was the key. Your father's notes were deliberate misinformation, Steiner said quietly. Richard was a good man, but he was never fully trusted by the higher-ups. He was given partial truths, fragments of the larger operation. He was disgraced, James shouted. Dismissed from the service, his reputation destroyed, because of you. Because of a necessary sacrifice, Steiner countered. Someone had to take the blame for the Berlin fiasco, and Richard agreed it should be him. His disgrace allowed him to operate in the shadows, tracking Soviet agents without their knowledge. It was the bravest thing he ever did. Timothy, who had recovered enough to stand, suddenly spoke up. The medal in my pocket, it's not my grandfather's, is it? Steiner turned to him with sad eyes. No, Timothy. It belonged to Colonel Ellis. Harold kept it safe until it could be returned to its rightful owner. Which is me, James insisted. No, Steiner shook his head. It belongs in the Imperial War Museum, along with the truth about Richard's service. That's what he wanted, what he made Harold promise before he died. Dr. Graves stepped closer, his face contorted with frustration. Enough of this sentimentality. Where are the actual intelligence files? The evidence of who worked with whom? My uncle spent his life trying to expose the truth about post-war intelligence operations. There are no files, Steiner repeated. Only memories and codes and secrets carried to Graves. James's grip on his weapon tightened again. I don't believe you, the marmalade jars, were exactly what they appeared to be, Agatha interrupted firmly. Jars of Seville orange marmalade, made with a recipe passed down through generations of my family, with a few bitter strands arranged in a particular pattern. Nothing more. Then why did you report them stolen? James demanded. Because they were, Agatha replied simply. Someone took them from my pantry. You, I now realize, and replaced them with inferior copies. The marmalade competition may seem trivial to you, Mr. Ellis, but it matters to me. A silence fell over the group, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the remnants of the jetty. Even the police officers seemed uncertain how to proceed in the face of these cascading revelations about decades-old intelligence operations. Miss Marple cleared her throat softly. Inspector, I believe this might be an appropriate moment to show Mr. Ellis the pocket watch. Craddock, who had been maintaining his defensive stance throughout the exchange, carefully extracted the silver timepiece from his pocket with his free hand. "This was found in Mrs. Blackwood's garden shed," he explained, holding it up so the moonlight caught its polished surface. James stared at it, his weapon lowering slightly. "My father's watch. He said it was stolen the day he was dismissed." "Not stolen," Steiner corrected gently. "Entrusted to Harold for safekeeping. Open it, Inspector. Show him what's inside." Craddock carefully pressed the catch. The watch case sprang open, revealing not only the watch face but something else. A small compartment behind the mechanism, containing a tightly folded piece of paper. Chapter 10. The Final Ingredient. The folded paper from within the watch seemed to hold everyone in a trance. Inspector Craddock carefully extracted it with the tip of his pen, unfolding it to reveal handwriting faded but still legible in the beam of his torch. "It's a letter," he announced, squinting at the cramped script. "Addressed to my son." James Ellis's weapon lowered further, his attention now fully captured. "Read it," he demanded, his voice suddenly unsteady. "Please." Craddock glanced at Miss Marple, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Clearing his throat, he began to read. "My son, if you are reading this, then you have found Steiner and the watch. I pray that your discovery was not born of vengeance, though I fear it may be. What you have been told about my disgrace is, I regret to say, a necessary fiction. There was no betrayal, no treason, only the cruel necessities of a shadow war. Hermann Steiner saved my life in Berlin in 1945 and has been a loyal ally to Britain ever since. The operation that supposedly failed because of his information was in fact compromised from within our own ranks. I accepted the blame to protect the ongoing mission and the lives of agents still in the field. I have no biological children, but I have always thought of you as my son in every way that matters. I beg you to let old secrets rest. The world we fought for, Steiner and I, Harold and Manning, is imperfect but worth preserving. Do not seek retribution for wrongs that exist only in falsified files. The watch plays Mozart's Requiem when wound. Remember me not with sorrow, but with the knowledge that I did what I believed right. With eternal affection, Richard Ellis. As Craddock's voice fell silent, the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the shore. James stood frozen, his weapon now hanging limply at his side. "When was this written?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. Steiner answered softly. "The night before Richard died, January 12th, 1975. He knew he was dying. Yes, liver cancer. He had perhaps 6 months, but chose to end matters on his own terms. Dr. Graves made a derisive sound. Convenient. A letter that can't be verified, conveniently appearing at the perfect moment. Miss Marple spoke up, her voice mild but penetrating. On the contrary, Dr. Graves, or should I say, Mr. Reed, the handwriting can certainly be verified against Colonel Ellis's official reports. I imagine the police would be most interested in making that comparison. Dr. Graves stiffened. How do you know that name? A fortunate coincidence, Miss Marple explained. My nephew Raymond mentioned a Peter Reed, who had been making persistent inquiries at the Foreign Office archives. A man claiming to be researching a book about post-war intelligence operations. The description matched you precisely. Craddock's attention had shifted to the false doctor. Reed? As in Robert Reed, the German counterintelligence officer. My uncle, Dr. Graves, Reed, admitted with a defiant lift of his chin, a patriot who spent his life trying to expose the preferential treatment given to German traitors after the war. While conveniently overlooking the similar arrangements made for German scientists and intelligence officers who served Western interests, Miss Marple observed, "A human memory is so selective in what it preserves and what it discards, rather like the marmalade-making process itself." Timothy, who had been watching this exchange with growing comprehension, suddenly addressed James. "The note I received, it wasn't from Mr. Steiner at all. It was from you." James nodded reluctantly. "I needed to get you away from the police. I thought you knew where the microfilms were hidden." "There were never any microfilms," Steiner repeated patiently. "Only encoded information in the placement of the orange strands. Information that became obsolete when the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War is over, Mr. Ellis. Not for everyone," James replied, but the fight had gone out of him. Slowly, he placed his weapon on the ground and kicked it toward Craddock. "My father, was he truly respected within the service? Not a traitor?" "He was one of the bravest men I ever knew," Steiner said quietly. "He sacrificed his reputation to protect the mission. Few have that kind of courage." As Craddock moved to secure the weapon and place James under arrest, Miss Marple turned to Agatha. "I believe your marmalade recipe truly is remarkable, my dear, though perhaps not in the way the village competition judges have appreciated." Agatha smiled faintly. "Harold always said the secret was in balancing the bitter and the sweet. I suppose he meant that in more ways than one." Peter Reed was not surrendering as peacefully as James. "This proves nothing. Records can be falsified, memories manipulated. Steiner was a double agent, working both sides. Triple agent, actually," Steiner corrected mildly. "I began working for German intelligence, was turned by the Soviets, and then offered my services to the British when I realized the true nature of the Nazi regime. Harold was my first British contact. We met in Berlin in 1938. "And the purpose of maintaining your cover all these years?" Craddock asked as his officers secured Reed. "Initially, to protect active agents. Later." Steiner glanced at Agatha. "To protect friends, and to live a quiet life in a place I had come to love." Caroline, who had been silent through much of the confrontation, finally spoke. "So all those years you lived next door as Eliza Hartley, the gardening competitions, the village committees, the endless cups of tea, were not entirely pretense," Steiner assured her. "One cannot maintain a cover for decades without it becoming, in some ways, genuine. I have been Eliza Hartley longer than I was ever Hermann Steiner." Miss Marple nodded understandingly. "We all become, to some extent, the roles we play in life." As the police led the two men away, Timothy approached Steiner, with the medal in his outstretched hand. "I think this belongs to you." Steiner shook his head. "No, Timothy. It belongs to the past. A past that should finally be laid to rest." "What will happen to you now?" Agatha asked Steiner. "Will you have to testify? Go into protective custody?" "After all these revelations, I rather think my days of hiding are over," Steiner replied with a small smile, though I might keep the cottage. I've grown fond of my roses." "And the marmalade competition?" Agatha inquired, a twinkle returning to her eye. "I believe I shall withdraw my entry," Steiner said solemnly. "Some contests are best left to the true experts." Later, as they returned to the Blackwood residence, Miss Marple sat quietly in the back of Inspector Craddock's car, her knitting once again in her hands. Beside her, Agatha stared out at the passing hedgerows. "How did you know, Jane?" she asked eventually. "About Eliza being Herman?" "Several small things," Miss Marple replied. "The way she held her teacup. Most English women cradle it, but she always grasped it by the handle, very precisely. German training is quite thorough, and her gardening gloves, always worn even in the mildest weather, concealing hands that might reveal a different life. But mostly it was the sugar." "The sugar? 3 spoons," stirred counterclockwise. "When you mentioned it was Harold's habit to tease Steiner about it, I recalled seeing Eliza do precisely the same thing at every tea-gathering for the past 30 years. And the marmalade itself, did you suspect its secret purpose?" Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. "I had my suspicions when I noticed how meticulously you arranged the bitter strands before sealing each jar. Far too precise for mere aesthetic concerns." Agatha smiled faintly. "Harold taught me the pattern the day before he died. I never knew what it meant, only that it was important to maintain the tradition precisely." "The best secrets," Miss Marple observed, "are often hidden in plain sight, preserved in the most ordinary rituals, rather like village life itself." As St. Mary Mead came into view, its familiar cottages and gardens bathed in moonlight, Miss Marple reflected that even in this peaceful corner of England, human nature remained as complex and surprising as ever, a recipe of bitter and sweet that, when properly balanced, revealed the most remarkable truths. Chapter 11. Preserving the Past. The morning of the rescheduled Seville Orange Festival dawned clear and bright. The village hall had been decorated with orange and yellow bunting, and a sense of excitement hummed in the air, intensified rather than diminished by the dramatic events of the preceding days. Miss Marple arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, her favourite lavender dress exchanged for a pale blue ensemble that brought out the clarity of her eyes. The hall was already filling with villagers eager to witness the judging, and perhaps more importantly, to exchange the latest theories about what the newspapers were now calling the Marmalade Mystery. "Jane, over here," called Agatha, waving from her usual place at the judge's table. Restored to her rightful position of honour, she looked remarkably well, the strain of recent days erased by the satisfaction of mysteries resolved. "My dear, you look positively radiant," Miss Marple observed as she joined her friend. "One would never guess the ordeal you've endured." Agatha smiled. "There's something to be said for truth, however belatedly it arrives. I feel as though a weight has been lifted, one I've carried for 40 years without fully acknowledging its presence." The hall continued to fill. Timothy and Caroline entered together, their relationship visibly strengthened by shared adversity. They were followed shortly by Inspector Craddock, who had exchanged his official uniform for a more casual tweed jacket, though the vigilance in his eyes remained unmistakably professional. "Inspector," Miss Marple greeted him, "how kind of you to attend a village event on your day off." "Hardly off duty when half my suspects are gathered in one room," he replied with a wry smile. "Though I suppose suspects is no longer the appropriate term. Participants in a most unusual drama," Miss Marple suggested. "One with a surprisingly satisfactory resolution, all things considered." Craddock nodded. "Reed and Ellis have been formally charged, though Ellis may receive leniency in light of the circumstances. The Home Office is still debating what to do about Steiner. Or should we say Eliza?" Agatha inquired. "That remains to be determined," Craddock replied. "The situation has created quite a stir in certain departments, decades of intelligence operations suddenly requiring re-evaluation. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the person in question. A murmur swept through the hall as Hermann Steiner entered, still dressed as Eliza Hartley, but with an unmistakably different bearing. The wig had been adjusted to sit more naturally, and the makeup applied with a lighter touch. But the essential disguise remained. "Continuity," Steiner explained, catching their surprised expressions. "After so many years, abandoning Eliza entirely would seem disrespectful to the life I've built here. And practically speaking," Miss Marple added with her characteristic perception, "it allows certain official questions to remain comfortably unresolved." "There is that," Steiner acknowledged with a small smile. "Though I understand I'll need to make a formal statement to your superiors eventually, Inspector." "At their convenience, not yours," Craddock confirmed, though without particular severity. The village chairman called for attention, bringing the room to order as he prepared to open the judging. "Ladies and gentlemen, after our recent disruptions, it is with great pleasure that we resume our beloved Seville Orange Festival. Our first category, as always, will be the traditional marmalade, judged on colour, consistency, flavour, and adherence to heritage methods." As the judges moved to their positions, Agatha leaned toward Miss Marple. "I've made an executive decision," she confided. "This will be my last year of competition. After 54 consecutive victories, it's time to pass the golden spoon to new hands." "A generous gesture," Miss Marple observed, "though I suspect your reasons extend beyond mere sporting fairness. Let's just say that some traditions, while comforting, can become burdensome when maintained solely for the sake of the past," Agatha replied. "Harold would understand. He always believed in moving forward." The judging commenced with its usual ceremonial flourish. Jars were opened, contents examined, small portions sampled on silver spoons, and cryptic notes made on official scorecards. Through it all, Miss Marple knitted quietly, her needles moving in their familiar rhythm as she observed the proceedings with keen interest. When the moment of announcement arrived, there was a palpable tension in the air. The chairman cleared his throat portentously. "The winner of this year's Golden Spoon for traditional marmalade is, for the 54th consecutive year, Mrs. Agatha Blackwood." Applause erupted, tinged with both admiration and the faintest hint of resignation. Agatha rose to accept the trophy, her smile gracious but tempered with something new, a gentle determination. "Thank you," she said, addressing the gathering. "This has always been a tremendous honour, and never more so than today. However, I wish to announce that I will be retiring from competition after this victory." A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed by a buzz of astonished whispers. "Instead," Agatha continued, I will be donating my family recipe to the village archives, where it will be available to anyone who wishes to study it. Some traditions are meant to be shared, not hoarded." As she returned to her seat amid renewed applause, Steiner leaned over to whisper, "Are you certain about this, Agatha? That recipe has been your family's treasure for generations." "The recipe itself is just ingredients and methods," Agatha replied calmly. "The true value was never in the paper it was written on, but in the hands that created it and the memories it preserved." Miss Marple nodded approvingly. Like all the best secrets, its power lay not in concealment, but in what it revealed about those who kept it. Outside, spring sunshine bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden light reminiscent of Agatha's award-winning preserve. Life would continue its measured pace in this quintessential English village, where gardens would bloom, gossip would flow like tea, and beneath the tranquil surface, human nature would remain as complex and fascinating as ever. And Miss Jane Marple, with her innocent blue eyes and deceptively simple manner, would continue to observe it all, preserving in her keen mind the bittersweet truths that made every human mystery worth solving.